Podcast Talk.
Learn English naturally.
Why small talk actually matters. Have you ever felt that people are polite in English, but somehow distant? Like there's an invisible wall in the conversation?
Many learners think this happens because of mistakes. But even with perfect English, that distance can still be there.
You answer clearly, you sound correct, yet conversations don't move forward the way you expect.
It's usually the moment people stop listening closely and start feeling uncomfortable without knowing why.
And the reason is often not your English level, but something much simpler that most learners ignore.
It's the lack of small talk. The part people want to skip because it feels unnecessary or awkward.
But without small talk, conversations don't feel efficient. They feel cold and tense.
Native speakers use small talk to check if it's safe to connect, not to exchange information.
Once you see this, many awkward moments in English suddenly start to make sense.
And that's why small talk matters more than most English learners ever realize.
Small talk exists to create emotional safety. Before people share opinions, ideas, or anything personal, they subconsciously check one thing first. Do I feel comfortable here? Small talk is how that question gets answered without anyone saying it out loud.
That's why small talk usually happens before anything important. It prepares the space. It lowers tension. It tells everyone involved that the conversation is friendly, normal, and safe to continue.
When learners skip small talk, they often jump straight into the point. And while that feels efficient, it can make the other person feel rushed, pressured, or emotionally unprepared.
Native speakers sense this immediately. Even if your English is perfect, the conversation can feel off. Not wrong, just too fast for the level of connection that exists.
Small talk slows conversations down in a good way. It allows people to adjust to each other, to tone, mood, and energy before moving forward.
Exactly. And that pause is important. People often need a moment like that before they decide how honestly they want to answer.
When people use small talk before answering, they're often protecting the conversation itself. They're not ready to give a clear answer yet because they're still reading the situation, the tone, and the emotional temperature. This is very common in English, and it's something learners usually don't expect at first.
Yes, and this is where misunderstandings often begin. Learners expect information, but native speakers are managing comfort. So instead of answering directly, they soften, delay, or redirect. Not to confuse you, but to keep things emotionally balanced.
This can be frustrating if you're not used to it. You might feel like your question was ignored, but very often, the person heard you perfectly. They're just choosing a safer way to respond.
In English, avoiding a question is sometimes a form of politeness. It's a way to say, I hear you, but I'm not ready to go there yet. And that meaning lives in tone, timing, and context, not in the words themselves.
Once you understand this, conversations feel much calmer. You stop pushing for clarity right away. You give people space. And very often, that space leads to more honest answers later.
This is a key skill in real English. Not knowing more words, but knowing when to wait, when to listen, and when not to demand an answer too soon.
One important thing to notice is that avoiding a question doesn't always mean avoiding honesty. Very often, it means choosing the right moment. People are asking themselves not, what should I say, but, is this the right time to say it?
And timing matters a lot in English conversations. The same answer can feel honest in one moment and uncomfortable in another. So people use indirect answers to protect both themselves and the flow of the conversation.
This is why you often hear answers that sound incomplete. They're not finished thoughts. They're invitations to continue or to stop, depending on how the other person reacts.
If the listener pushes, the speaker may close off even more. But if the listener stays open and patient, the answer often slowly becomes clearer on its own.
This can feel unfamiliar if your culture values directness. You might expect clarity first and emotions later. But in English, emotional comfort often comes before information.
That's why learning English isn't just about words. It's about learning how people manage space, silence, and uncertainty in conversation. Those skills make communication feel natural instead of forced.
Once you accept that not every question needs an immediate answer, you feel less anxious in conversations. You trust the process instead of rushing the result.
And this is when English starts to feel more human, less like a test, more like a shared experience where understanding grows over time.
Think about a work meeting. Someone asks, "Are you happy with this deadline?" And the answer isn't yes or no. It's something like, "Well, it's ambitious. We'll have to see how things go." That's not confusion. It's a careful way of saying, "I'm not comfortable answering directly."
And you hear this a lot in professional settings. People protect relationships first, facts second. They soften answers to avoid tension, to avoid sounding difficult, or to avoid closing doors too early.
You also see this in friendships. Someone asks, "Are you coming tonight?" And instead of saying no, the answer becomes, "I'll try, but it's been a long day." That's already the message.
If you take that answer literally, you might wait all night. But emotionally, the person already told you where they stand. They're not rejecting you, they're protecting their energy.
This is why understanding indirect answers is so important. It helps you respond with empathy instead of frustration. You stop feeling ignored and start reading the situation more accurately.
Dating is another area where this happens constantly. Questions about feelings, plans, or commitment rarely get direct answers at first. People circle around the truth until they feel safe enough to say it clearly.
And if you push too hard in those moments, you often get even less clarity. But if you give space, answers tend to reveal themselves naturally over time.
This is something native speakers learn intuitively. They don't always analyze it, they feel it. And learning English means learning to feel these moments too.
Once you start noticing patterns like these, you become more patient with others and with yourself. You realize that communication is not about speed, but about timing.
And that shift alone can change how confident you feel in English. You stop chasing perfect answers and start trusting the flow of real conversations.
Another everyday situation is family conversations. Someone asks a simple question like, "Are you okay with this plan?" And the answer becomes a story about being tired, busy, or stressed. That story is not random. It's a softer way of saying, "I'm not fully on board, but I don't want conflict right now."
People often do this when the relationship matters more than the answer. They're choosing harmony over clarity. So instead of a direct response, they give context, hoping the other person will understand without pushing.
This can feel confusing if you're expecting efficiency. You might think, why didn't they just say yes or no? But in real conversations, efficiency is not always the goal. Emotional safety often comes first.
And this is especially true in sensitive topics. Money, feelings, health, future plans. These questions carry weight. Avoiding a direct answer can be a way to carry that weight carefully.
When you understand this, you stop taking indirect answers personally. You see them as signals, not rejections, and that shift alone can change how connected you feel in conversations.
There's also a power dynamic here. Sometimes people avoid answering because saying no feels risky. So they leave things open, vague, or unfinished until they feel more secure.
You'll notice this a lot at work, especially with deadlines or responsibilities. People talk around the question to protect their position, their image, or their options.
And once you start recognizing these patterns, you become better at responding instead of reacting. You choose patience over pressure, which often leads to clearer outcomes later.
This skill doesn't make you passive, it makes you attentive. You learn when to wait, when to ask again, and when to let the conversation move on.
And this is how English starts to feel natural. Not because you control every answer, but because you understand why answers sometimes don't come directly.
What often helps in these moments is noticing what comes before the non answer. The hesitation, the pause, the smile, the extra context. Those details tell you more than the final words, and they guide you on how gently or firmly you should respond next.
For example, if someone pauses and adds context, it's usually a sign to slow down. You might respond with understanding instead of another question. That patience often invites a clearer answer without any pressure.
But if someone avoids again after you give space, that's information too. It may mean the topic is off limits for now, and respecting that boundary keeps the relationship intact, even if the answer stays unclear.
In real English, clarity often arrives gradually. It shows up across several conversations, not in one perfect sentence. Learning to notice that progression is a huge step toward confidence.
This approach also reduces misunderstandings. Instead of assuming someone is hiding something, you recognize they're navigating comfort, timing, and trust at their own pace.
If you want to keep the conversation moving, gentle follow-ups work best. Simple responses like, I get it, or that makes sense, often open the door more than another direct question.
Over time, you start trusting yourself in these moments. You stop forcing clarity and start reading the room. That awareness makes conversations feel balanced instead of tense.
This is a skill you can use everywhere, at work, with friends, and in relationships. It's not about being passive, it's about choosing the right moment to ask again or to wait.
When you learn this, English stops feeling unpredictable. You see patterns instead of chaos, and those patterns help you stay calm, even when answers aren't clear yet.
Understanding why people avoid answering questions isn't just about language. It's about understanding people, and that changes everything.
Another thing people rarely talk about is how avoiding questions becomes a habit over time. After enough uncomfortable moments, people learn that answering indirectly feels safer. So instead of choosing honesty first, they choose comfort, especially when the relationship matters.
That's why indirect answers are not random. They're shaped by experience, by past reactions, by moments where honesty didn't feel welcome or safe. Understanding this changes how you hear people.
When learners don't know this, they often blame themselves. They think their English isn't good enough. But very often, the language is fine. What's missing is an understanding of emotional context.
An emotional context can't be translated word for word. It lives in pauses, tone, and what isn't said. That's why listening is just as important as speaking when learning English.
This understanding also makes conversations feel kinder. You stop demanding answers. You allow people to arrive at honesty in their own time. And that patience often deepens trust instead of weakening it.
Many conflicts actually start because someone pushed too early. They wanted clarity before the other person was ready. Avoiding questions is sometimes a way to delay conflict, not avoid truth.
If you pay attention, you'll notice patterns. The same phrases, the same pauses, the same shifts in topic. These are signals, and learning to read them makes communication calmer and clearer.
This skill is especially powerful because it works everywhere. At work, in relationships, with friends. Once you understand why people avoid answers, you stop reacting emotionally and start responding wisely.
And slowly, English starts to feel less stressful. You're no longer chasing perfect answers. You're listening for meaning, intention, and readiness. That shift alone builds confidence.
Understanding indirect answers doesn't make communication slower, it makes it deeper. You stop rushing people. And when answers finally come, they feel more honest and more real.
Another pattern worth noticing is how people use vague language to buy time. Phrases like, we'll see, let's think about it, or maybe later often appear when someone needs space to process. They're not dismissing the question, they're asking for emotional room before committing to an answer.
You'll hear this a lot in leadership and management. Direct answers can lock people into decisions. So instead, they keep language open, flexible, and non-final. Understanding this helps you avoid misreading hesitation as weakness.
What's interesting is that most people don't even realize they're avoiding a question. To them, it feels natural. They're not making a decision in that moment. They're feeling their way through it. And that emotional process often comes before any clear answer.
That's why pressing for clarity too early rarely works. You're asking for a decision before the person has reached it internally. And when that happens, avoidance becomes stronger, not weaker.
This shows us something important. Avoiding a question is often a signal of uncertainty, not dishonesty. People are sorting out their feelings before they can sort out their words.
If you learn to recognize that moment, you stop taking things personally. You realize the answer isn't about you. It's about where the other person is emotionally right now.
And this understanding changes how you listened. You stop waiting for the right words. You start paying attention to hesitation, tone, and timing. Those details often say more than a direct answer ever could.
In real conversations, meaning builds slowly. It's layered. It appears across pauses, changes of topic, and repeated patterns. Once you accept that, English feels much less confusing.
This is why patience is such a powerful communication skill. Not silence, not passivity, but patience, the ability to wait without pushing.
And when people feel that patience from you, they relax. They feel less judged, less rushed, and much more willing to share when they're ready.
Over time, this creates deeper conversations. Not louder ones, not faster ones, but conversations where trust has space to grow naturally.
This is a skill that goes far beyond English. It changes how you communicate in any language. Because it's rooted in understanding people, not controlling outcomes.
When you stop demanding direct answers, something interesting happens. You start receiving more honest ones, not immediately, but more genuinely.
And that's when English stops feeling like a challenge. It becomes a tool for connection, for understanding, for real communication.
There's also something important about how this changes your confidence. When you understand that indirect answers are normal, you stop feeling lost in conversations. You stop asking yourself, did I misunderstand? And instead, you start trusting what you hear.
That trust changes how you show up in conversations. You're less tense, less defensive, and more present. People feel that even if they can't explain why.
And interestingly, when you stop pushing for answers, people often feel safer with you. They don't feel interrogated. They feel heard. And that changes the entire tone of communication.
This is why some of the best conversations feel slow. They don't rush toward conclusions. They allow meaning to unfold naturally without forcing clarity before it's ready.
For English learners, this can be a huge relief. You don't need to respond perfectly. You don't need to understand everything immediately. You just need to stay present and curious.
And that mindset alone improves your English. Not by adding more words, but by reducing pressure. And pressure is often the biggest blocker.
When pressure goes down, listening improves. You notice tone, you notice pauses, you notice what's being avoided and why. That awareness is incredibly powerful.
This is the kind of skill that grows quietly. You don't notice it day by day. But one day, conversations feel easier, and you realize something has shifted.
And that's when English stops feeling like effort. It starts feeling like connection, like something you participate in, not something you perform.
If you stayed with us until this point, that already tells us something. You're not just learning English, you're learning how communication really works.
Thank you for spending this time with us. We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, keep listening, keep noticing, and keep trusting the process.